So far, we have not received any further information. And this is, I think, a key difficulty because we're more than halfway through the 18-month review period, but it's never really been made clear to the Australian public exactly what is being involved in terms of the timing, the kinds of submarines, where we expect to get them from. Moreover, there's been no debate whatsoever amongst the government or the bureaucracy about whether, in fact, these particular kinds of submarines are a good idea.
Now, the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, says there is a preference for a sub that can be operated by either the US or the UK. What does this tell us about our capabilities in handling nuclear power?
Yeah, Australia has very limited capabilities in exactly that issue. And this is a further reason why we should be thinking twice about whether or not it is nuclear-powered submarines that we want. But again, there's been no discussion of alternatives. And one of the chief problems, I think, is that at this stage, the submarines are set to use highly enriched uranium, which is a very, very risky path to go down. At the very least, if we are going to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, we should be looking at low-enriched uranium. That poses much less of a risk. But in either case, there are problems with Australia's own technical capabilities.
Of course, now we're going into a new era of using nuclear power to power those subs. There are, of course, questions about the budget. The Defence Minister, Richard Marles, is tight-lipped about it. What are your expectations about the costs?
It is going to be eye-wateringly high. The latest estimate is around $170 billion, but I think that that figure may well go up. The other thing is the timing of these submarines. We are not likely to get the first of them until the 2040s, and it may be the 2050s before we might see the final one delivered. And that also leaves a capability gap for Australia's submarines. So there are questions about what we might do in the interim period if we're going full tilt for these nuclear-powered submarines.
I want to look at recent comments from China. Of course, it's no surprise that Beijing is trying to stop Australia from getting its hands on nuclear-powered subs and have set their sights on the UN's nuclear watchdog. Does China have a case at all with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, given, although it appears inconceivable that we'd go down the nuclear weapons route?
You're right to note that Australia is highly unlikely to want to access the uranium in the submarine hulls and divert that for weapons purposes. But nonetheless, there are some problems, because what we would be doing is setting a very risky precedent. To date, no non-nuclear weapon state has been given nuclear technology for submarines, because that does pose a proliferation risk. Now, officials here in Australia are saying that these submarines will be under IAEA safeguards, but I think China is right to note that it's simply not possible to monitor with all guarantees nuclear-powered submarines which are submerged for many months at a time. So China sometimes has been rather overstated in its objections, but we should remember that it isn't only China that has objected to this. A number of other states, Indonesia, Malaysia, the South Pacific states, and indeed many non-proliferation specialists from all around the world, including from the United States and the UK, are saying that this is not a good road to go down because it does weaken the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it's hard to see how it could possibly benefit the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the world's efforts to control fissile material.
But would it not give Australia as a strategic leg up in maritime security, given we've seen sometimes aggressive moves by the Chinese Navy in our region, but also in terms of freedom of navigation in regional waters? We've seen confrontations in the South China Sea.
I think we have to be careful if we're saying things like, Chinese confrontations towards us in our seas. I mean, there's a big, big topic here about exactly what kind of threat China does pose. Now, I believe, as do a number of others, that this threat is being overstated in Australia to a very large extent. That, yes, China is a growing power. It is going to exercise more influence in the region. Does that pose a military threat to Australia? I don't believe it does. But our acquiring nuclear-powered submarines signals an intention to challenge China militarily alongside the United States. And I don't think that is something that we need to be doing or that would be a wise decision at all.
And you earlier talked about concerns among our neighbours, Indonesia, the Pacific Island states. Of course, there have been many visits since the Albanese government came to power by Penny Wong, by the Prime Minister himself. Have they not done enough to calm the nerves in Southeast Asia and the Pacific about the future of nuclear subs in Australia?
No, they haven't. And for the simple reason that they cannot. Because what we have to remember is that for ASEAN states and South Pacific states, nuclear-propelled submarines or anything to do with nuclear weapons or nuclear testing is really undesirable. And if we look at the history of testing, both in Australia and in the South Pacific, there's a very good reason why these states have nuclear weapon-free zones. And so they do see Australia as betraying the trust implied in the relationship with those states.
Okay, Marianne Hanson, really good to get your thoughts. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.